Well, good morning. This is Ian R. Crane, and it's the morning of Wednesday, the 9th of January, 2019. And it's a very crisp morning here on the edge of the East Lancashire moors, and it should be an absolutely stunningly beautiful blue sky on this crisp winter's morning. But unfortunately, there's a lot of aircraft flying over this area, leaving these horrendous trails of pollution or geoengineering. And one of the things that never fails to amuse me is the more somebody wants to wax lyrical about climate change, the less likely they are to want to enter into any discussion about the geoengineering, which is increasingly evident. Anyway, that's not the topic of today's broadcast. Here we are, 2019, and it is a case of let the chaos commence, because this is going to be the year of chaos brought about by the deep state and the establishment, who working to a slightly different agenda, but nonetheless using the same tactics to try to get everybody into such a traumatic mindset that they just want to dig a hole, bury their heads in it and go, oh, let me know when it's all over. Well, it'll be over quicker if we participate. So let's take a look at what's going on. We've got a lot of things to get through this morning on varied subjects. And I'm actually going to start with an apology, because on Friday I made the observation, a little bit tongue-in-cheek perhaps, but some people took it very seriously, that the golden piano was that the Queen sat in front of during her Christmas broadcast was the spoils of the Iraq War. Well, actually, the reason it was tongue-in-cheek was because the source for that was the BBC. In fact, specifically Jane Bird at the BBC. And, you know, God forbid that I should ever quote from, you know, one of the most outrageous propaganda outlets on the planet. So anyway, the bottom line is that the piano was apparently a gift to Queen Victoria back in the mid-19th century. And it was the BBC, for whatever reason, wanting to put out the story that the piano was the spoils of the Iraq War. Anyway, staying on the perhaps the gold colour, let's have a look at what's going on in France, because you're not likely to see too much about what's occurring in France on the British mainstream media. Although that has taken a bit of a turn over the last couple of days, following events this weekend, and particularly the videos that have gone absolutely viral of the former boxing champion, Christophe Dettinger, and somebody from the other side, a police commander, literally laying in to their opponents. Well, Christophe Dettinger has made a statement, and this statement is very, very interesting, because he said he lost it. And the reason he lost it was because he, his wife, and a friend of theirs had been tear gassed. And, you know, he says he overreacted, and, you know, there is this footage of him literally squaring up to the riot police, the CRS. But he made this statement before handing himself into the police. He said, "I'm demonstrating for all pensioners, for the future of my children, for single women, for everything we are fighting for. I am a Gilet Jaune. I have the anger of the people in me. It's always the little people who pay." Now, you notice that something is missing from his statement, because he omitted to mention the fact that the Gilet Jaune protest is actually about fuel tax. Well, of course he omitted it, because it isn't. Because that's the lie, that's the misinformation that has been the thread of the British media trying to play down what's occurring in France. And Christophe Dettinger is very much representative of the thousands of people that are taking to the streets each weekend in France as they attempt to get their country back, because they have realized that the agenda, the globalist agenda, is to destroy the French economy and to destroy French culture. And of course, people say, well, how did Macron get into office? Like, elections aren't manipulated. But of course, they helped that by putting Marine Le Pen as the far-right candidate and, painting the picture that unless they voted for Macron, then they were likely to end up with Marine Le Pen. Well, maybe now with the benefit of hindsight, they're reflecting on perhaps whether or not they made the right choice. The reality is that the protests in France are not going to stop anytime soon. The French people have now got the bit between their teeth, and they are determined that they will stop this rampant corporatism that is destroying their economy. And today is day one where the Gilet Jaune are asking people throughout France, do not buy produce from the supermarkets, from the corporatist supermarkets. There's no need to. French culture still embraces the daily markets in the town centres. So buy your produce from the town centre markets. Reboot the local economies in France by starving the corporations of their much needed revenue. And apparently some of the supermarkets are taking this very, very seriously and have reportedly already reduced the amount of stock that they intend to put on the shelves. And of course, this is the way in which we collectively are able to hit back at the corporations. And of course, the French, just like the Greeks, the Spanish, the Italians, the Irish, and of course the British, are having their disposable income eroded, so that basically the only income they have now goes on the basics. This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So they're basically going on housing and food and other essentials. So there is no real disposable income for supposed luxury goods. And maybe eventually the corporations will recognize that whilst bleeding their employees by literally employing them on minimum wages or less or 0 hours contracts, eventually it means the markets dry up because there's nobody to buy your stuff. So Christophe Dechinger certainly triggered a massive emotional response, and a crowd fund was set up to support him, which literally within 48 hours reached 114,000 euros, which is just over 100,000 pounds. But the French government then effectively shut that down because they decided that the proceeds of violence against the police could not be justified in any way, shape or form. So, start to take a look at how the establishment will do whatever it can to literally hamstring the opposition, because, that is what is going to happen elsewhere. The Yellow Vest protest already spreading to the Netherlands, to Belgium, where the government has been forced into calling an election, primarily over the Belgian government's signing of the Marrakesh Treaty. Of course, this was signed on December the 11th, and although it's non-binding, the signatories have committed themselves to open-door migration. And seen anything about this in the British press? Funny that, isn't it? So, watch this space. And, you're not going to find too much about what's going on in France in the lamestream media. So you'll need to take a look at the alternative media. Well, yesterday, of course, the chaos in the UK continued last night with the sighting of yet another drone, this time over Heathrow. So this is now the go-to story the moment there are any problems at any airport. You know, systems failure, baggage handling failure, check-in system failure, air traffic control system failure. No, we're not going to admit to any incompetence. We're just going to blame it on a drone, and that'll buy us the time we need to sort out our glitch. Meanwhile, of course, it provides the opportunity to put increasingly draconian measures in place to restrict the use of drones. And you know, having spoken to a number of drone pilots over the past couple of weeks, I think I can pretty safely say that no self-respecting drone pilot is going to you know, be so foolhardy as to put the usage of these tools at risk. So, you know, just simply ask the question, who has most to gain by creating this BS? Because, you know, once again, there is no physical evidence, no photographic evidence, no video evidence of a drone. It's simply thrown out there by the airport management, and you know, they know obviously what their ultimate objective is. So watch this space. I think Heathrow did actually reopen after about an hour, but anytime an airport has a glitch, you can bet your bottom dollar that you're going to read that there was a suspected drone flying over the airfield. And funnily enough, you're not likely to see any genuine photographs or video footage of that. So, well, what else is going on? Well, Mark Steele, 5G, LED streetlights. And interestingly enough, yesterday in the Daily Mail, interesting article perhaps on page 36. Sorry if you're watching this on Facebook, because it will be back to front. How indoor lights can leave you suffering jet lag. And the subtitle here is Groggy, Irritable and Struggling to Focus. In part 2 of our special series, Linda Geddes explains why your body clock may be out of sync even if you've not been abroad. And it flags up the fact that the blue light frequencies of LED lights, whether they be in the home or in the street lights that are manifesting throughout the UK, these blue light frequencies have a very, very significant impact on the circadian rhythm, on the natural body clock. And they also have a negative effect on our hormones, which is why studies that have been produced by the University of Exeter and the Barcelona Center for Global Health in Spain have established through 2 separate trials that excessive exposure to these LEDs, and particularly the street lights, increases the risk of both prostate cancer and breast cancer. So prostate for the men, obviously, breast cancer for the women. And the reason being is because they are both linked to hormonal imbalance. Well, meanwhile, of course, Mark Steele in Gateshead has been trying to flag this up, and he's been asking the hard questions of Gateshead Council. And last year, where Gateshead Council was seeking to get an injunction against Mark Steele, Recorder Nolan, who was presiding over the hearing, stated categorically that he was definitely not going to gag Mark Steele. He was simply going to demand that he behave himself. And he instructed Gateshead Council to take the concerns of Mark and other residents over 5G and LED streetlights seriously. Well, Mark has been, of course, pursuing his quest to get responses from Gateshead Council, and they are now seeking to get Mark jailed for his campaign. So this coming Monday at the Moot Hall, which is at Castle Garth, Newcastle, and I'll put the address under this video. Postcode is NE11RQ, but at 10 o'clock on Monday of next week, Gateshead Council are seeking to get a committal hearing to get Mark Steele jailed for breach of the injunction. Well, Mark certainly hasn't breached the injunction. He has simply been pursuing precisely what Recorder Nolan gave him carte blanche to do, which was to ask the hard questions. And as he said, this is democracy in action. Well, of course, this is not the democracy that the corporatists want, or those who are carrying out the agenda of the corporatists, i.e. the council officers. It's not what they want. So now they are seeking to remove Mark's liberty. So, needless to say, I shall be in Newcastle next Monday. So if you can come along and join us. Interestingly, Gateshead Council are desperately trying to ensure that Judge Nolan doesn't preside over the case, because clearly Judge Nolan was not particularly sympathetic to their attempt to gag Mark Steele, and so they're now trying to get another judge. Mark, of course, has written to the court saying, well, you know, it was Judge Nolan who effectively established the terms of the ongoing injunction, which simply require Mark to behave with the appropriate decorum. So let's see how this unfolds, because this is yet another prima facie attack on the freedom of expression, freedom of speech, and of course of democracy. So 5G is going to be the big issue for this year. You know, here we are in the 7th year now of the anti-fracking campaign. It's just over 6 years and almost 1 month since the moratorium on fracking was lifted in the UK in December of 2012. But it's not looking too good for the UK mother frackers. You know, Preston New Road, Quadrilla appear to be removing all of their kit. So they've basically given up on the fracking of the first well that they drilled without getting anywhere near the volume or the pressure that they needed to be able to establish flow rates from the shale. They know very, very well that the moment they do fire up those pumps to full pressure and attempt to put the full amount of liquid that they put in their original plan, the moment they do try that, they are going to trigger such a significant seismic event. It's going to be the end of the industry once and for all. So what's happening right now, of course, is that Quadrilla have to decide whether or not they're going to attempt to get the permission to go back and frack the second well that they've drilled, which I think that the prognosis of that is fairly apparent to everybody and their dog. It would, of course, result in yet more seismic activity in the Blackpool area, or whether they blag their investors and get enough cash to go and drill the other 2 wells at Preston New Road, which they already have permission to drill, but haven't yet done so. So Francis Egan, of course, desperate to blag in whatever way he can, CEO of Quadrilla since late 2012, drawing about $500,000 a year in compensation and benefits from Quadrilla. And of course, it's a Ponzi scheme, and he's very happy to keep this Ponzi scheme going while he's getting the salary and the benefits from this company. I mean, it's outrageous, you know. His benefits package is not conducive with a company that employs just 18 people. But there you go. There's no sanity in corporatocracy. Quite the opposite. And the other side of the country, of course, iGas are in the process of vacating Tinker Lane, stating that they couldn't find the Boland Shale. Well, let me tell you, there is no way that iGas drilled down to 3,300 meters in 3 weeks. It seems to me that the most likely account is that they had a very significant collapse of the geology whilst they were drilling, so much so that they've actually had to abandon that well. So now they are moving to Misson Springs, where they have permission to drill 2 exploratory wells, which of course does mean that if they do get a similar collapse on the first, they can try a second time. But the likelihood is that they don't have permission. Well, they definitely don't have permission to frack those wells yet at Misson Springs. These are just exploratory wells. So the likelihood of a frack in 2019 is actually really quite slim. But that doesn't mean that the communities can back up and back off in any way, shape or form. They have to keep the pressure on, keep kicking the can down the road until either the industry or the government finally concede the defeat that any independent observer knows is coming somewhat rapidly, more rapidly than they want to admit, that's for sure. So just staying with the fracking for 1 second, it is with much sadness that on Monday I learned that a guy who has been a very active campaigner on the front line, certainly since the Crawberry Hill campaign of 2014, which is where I first met him, and sadly Tom Burke passed away on Monday. And I have to say that Tom was a lovely guy. I don't think I ever saw him raise his voice or lose his cool. He was always right in amongst the thick of it. And not least, he was one of the first to volunteer to put his name alongside mine when we challenged the attempt to evict the fort that had been built at the entrance of the Crawberry Hill well site in East Yorkshire back in 2014. And once again, earlier this year in July, Tom was quick to contact me and say that he would be absolutely delighted to join me and a few others in challenging the quadrilla injunction in the Manchester courts. So Tom, absolutely committed campaigner. Coincidental, perhaps, that on the day that Tom passes is the day that the rig is removed from PNR. But Tom, you will certainly be remembered for your contribution to the anti-fracking campaign, and journey well. And if you're able to give us some help from the other side, then it will be very much appreciated, and I'm sure we'll hook up again at some future date. Well, finally, today I'm going to mention David Noakes, of course, who was jailed for having the audacity to produce GC-MAF, a proven, extremely effective cancer treatment, up to and including a full cure. And David called me from his cell in Wandsworth Prison last night. He's for the last 2 weeks he's been on his own, which he's more than happy with, but he is locked up for 22 hours a day. And obviously he is struggling, as he says. Wandsworth Prison was built in the middle of the 19th century, and it really has no place in the penal system of the 21st century. But he is working on the basis that he will be released on a tag at the back end of March. And at that point, of course, we can revisit the strategy for continuing to not only raise the awareness of the efficacy of GC-MAF, which the judge made very, very clear during David's sentencing hearing, that GC-MAF was not on trial. And he also went on to say that he had no doubt that many people had benefited from GC-MAF and that many people would benefit in the future. But of course, that's not if the MHRA, the Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Agency, have their way, because their job, of course, is to act as a pseudo-government department, but their real job is to protect the revenue stream of Big Pharma, and in particular, the outrageous revenue stream that comes from chemo and radiotherapy, the survival rate of which is about 2.7%. Well, that's it from me today. A bit longer than usual, but there's a lot going on. And the onus is on each and every one of us. And we haven't even really touched on the Brexit chaos. But the onus is very much down to us. The chaos is going to increase exponentially, because it is only through chaos that the establishment believe that they can maintain order. But we have to demonstrate that we, the collective we, are more than capable of dealing whatever it is that they want to throw out. And the more that they throw out, the more opportunity that we have to expose the outrageous agenda, which certainly does not have the best interests of humanity at heart. So thanks for joining me today. Spread the word. Never underestimate the power of sowing a seed. You never know when that seed will germinate, and when it does, that may be that brings about the changes that we all know we need to see. So you have a great day, and I'll be back with you on Friday morning at 8:30. You take care now.